we all clearly see that the silent mind is the door to freedom. When we are sitting in silent meditation, for instance, when we are able to dissociate from the chatter of thoughts and be able to remain still, then there is the abiding sense of peace, because it's very clear that it is thoughts that acts as the veil that prevents us from abiding in our own self. So the whole reason why we find any kind of disturbance of any at any level is due to thoughts, and thoughts are due to attachment to the idea of I and mine. So we have this idea of I as this body and mind and its identity, and mine as whatever belongs to this body or this mind, which is the both the gross objects such as one's properties, or then there are relations or identities, all of this. So when we are free of these things, when we sit in silent meditation, we are able to see that these are just thoughts. So that is, first of all, not as trivial, but through inquiry, we can see that these thoughts are just rising in awareness. So if we are very silent and we are able to not be carried away by the flow of thoughts, then we can see the thought rising, and we also see the I, who is the thinker, which is also only another thought. So the thinker and the thought are the same, and the root of it is the I thought. And therefore, when we are able to look at any thought and be able to also look at the reaction to the thought and not be identified with it, but be able to aware of it, then we are free of it. And this sense of silent space, peace, is there in meditation or in sitting silently. But then the question comes, how does one hold this space through the day? Because many things happen during the day and we slip out of this space of silence. There is the power of thought to carry us away, and then we get identified with thoughts. And then when there is identification with thought, there is inevitably conflict, and there is therefore disturbance. And then at the end of the day, we feel like we have slipped out of the space, and then perhaps we again start the day with a meditation. And then so this is still better than having no such anchoring, but it is still, it feels like it is constantly slipping in and out of the space of meditation. So that's the question. So there is a couple of important things to point out there. The first thing, of course, is to minimize engagements that are unnecessary. This may sound very trivial, but it is a very important thing that makes us unnecessarily get caught in activities which are pulling us out. So when we are going about the day, if we have responsibilities with respect to work or with family, they have to be carried out. But anything that's unnecessary, the more we are not running toward them, the better. And the easiest way is to seek out as much as possible satsang. And when we say satsang, it is not just a meeting like we are having now, which is a great blessing to meet together in the same place at the same time with the same intention. That's very beautiful always, but it's not always possible. But one can have satsang in many other ways. Sat is the word that means truth, as many know. So satsang literally means association with truth. So it is not dependent on people, though people who are abiding in satsang give a great space. So when we collectively come together, the sum is greater than the parts. And therefore, there is the collective energy with the collective intention to recognize the truth of our own being. And that collective energy has its powers, and that's why satsang is very beautiful. But even when we are alone, to use the time available when we have spare time to even as simply as picking up a book or listening to a talk or sitting silently or listening to a chant. There are so many ways, or having a discussion, even when we are having a discussion with friends, somehow steer the conversation toward the fundamental nature of humans, because any problem, if we diagnose it correctly, will come to the root, which is the I. So the tree can have many twigs, many leaves, many fruits, many flowers, but it has only one root. And literally, in fact, this is the example Krishna gives in the Gita. He says the whole samsara is like a tree. In the 15th chapter, he says the whole samsara is like a huge banyan tree with so many flowers and so many branches, and it's bewildering to look at this massive banyan tree. But then he says this intelligent one strikes at the root. You don't go after each branch, pruning branches, cutting, you know, some twigs off or pulling off some leaves. All of this is endless because they keep regrowing. So, in fact, the verse is Ashwattamenam suvirudamulam asanga shastrena dridena chitva. Krishna says Ashwattamenam. Ashwatta is the massive banyan tree this universe is compared to, this samsara. Suviruda Moolam, he says, the root of the tree, Asanga Shastrena Dridhena Chitva. He says, by the weapon of detachment, strike at the root. So that is the essence of being free of samsara, by striking at the root. And the striking at the root is by not being caught up in these branches. So even when we are having a conversation, what the context in which I was mentioning this is any conversation, whether it be about politics or whether it be about family issues or whether it be about anything, instead of getting caught in the particulars, if we draw the conversation to the root of it, then that is already satsang, because then we are not only not getting lost in the branches, but we are also engaging the other person who may not be aware of these things, to bring them subtly to the recognition that it is the ego that is the source of all these things, and we can be dissociated from the ego. So that is the way of doing satsang, even with those who are not necessarily exposed to these things by subtly but clearly bringing the conversation to the root of any problem, because the root of every problem is the same root. That's the, as it is said, the problems are many, the answer is one. The answer is to be free of the ego. That's the only answer for all problems. There are physical problems, of course, and that has to be dealt with. If one is sick or one is having fever, or there are physical problems that one has to deal with, but those problems are fairly clear what needs to be done. The other types of problems in which people are getting caught all the time is something that's always rooted in the ego. So going back to the question of how do I go through the day, there is the, as we said, the first, the minimizing of engagements in unnecessary activities as much as we can, then using the spare time for satsang in any way possible, and third, and the most important thing that I feel, is having an attitude of service. So this is something that's extremely important, what is called seva. And in fact, this is the key to many problems that we face. If we shift our inner attitude, so normally when we engage with the world, we can engage in two ways. To put it very broadly, we can either consume or we can serve. If we really look at it very carefully, whether it's a relationship or whether it's an object or whether it's a situation or a place, we can say what's in it for me or what can I offer this place. And they are a completely different paradigm. So if I am going to even a spiritual place, an ashram for instance, if I have the attitude of what's in it for me, I'm seeking some experience, it is still rooted in the ego, in the self. But if I can have the attitude of what can I offer this place, then we have a completely different place from which we function. So when we deal with people, or when we deal with even objects, when we deal with anything in the universe, if we recognize that everything is divine, because everything is a manifestation of the same one supreme energy, it is the one cosmic being form that is expressing itself in infinite diverse ways, starting with our own body. So even our attitude to our own body or to anyone else, anything else, can be with the attitude of service. So let's even take something as simple as our own body. If we look at the body as a temple that needs to be served and kept healthy as a vehicle for realizing God, then we don't eat the wrong kinds of food. We don't abuse the body in any way. But if we look at the body as something to consume for pleasure, we want to use the body for pleasure, then we start eating junk food and we do not take the right set of guidelines for taking care of the body even. So how we treat our own body is itself very indicative of how we approach life. If we get too consumed with it and too uh, obsessed with how the body looks. That's the other extreme, where one is very focused on vanity, which is another form of ego. But if one abuses the body, that's another form of ego, because one is simply consuming the body for pleasure. But if we serve by keeping the body like a temple, then we are serving our own body to keep it healthy just for the purpose of maintaining the journey of this life. And the same attitude can be brought to with anyone, even a stranger we meet on the street, or our own family, or friends, or work colleagues. They may not be exposed to anything to do with spirituality, let's say. Some of them may be, many of them may not be, but it doesn't matter, because if we have an attitude of service toward them, then they also will bring forth their best version without even realizing. And so, first, it's important to recognize what we mean by this, because the whole universe, as we said, is one interconnected single entity. It is the Virat Rupa, the one supreme being manifest as the universe. So, if we recognize this, then serving any part is serving the whole. Just like if I take my own body, if I serve something to do with the finger, it is serving the whole body. That is because it's all interconnected. So similarly, if we recognize that the whole universe is interconnected, that's why in Gita, Krishna reveals that the whole universe is his cosmic form, one body. It's a nice metaphor to think of, because it's the one body of which everyone is a part of, because everyone and everything is interconnected. We all breathe the same air, drink the same water, and as it is said, a plate of food in our breakfast table requires the whole universe. Without the sunlight, without the rains, without the farmers, without the bees, without the ants, without any of that, we cannot even have a small meal. So the whole universe is interconnected. So if we recognize this, and therefore if we serve the part, we serve the whole. So we are not serving individual egos. That is very important to recognize, that we are not here to please others' egos and their desires. That's actually hurting them, not helping them. We are only to serve them by recognizing that everyone is a part of the one Supreme Being. And practically speaking, there are at least three ways we can serve. There are more perhaps, but there is three that I can clearly see as ways in which we can serve without in any way pleasing their ego, but also serving them in the right way. The first and the basic thing is to not cause any disturbance to them. So that's why Krishna says in the Gita, that one verse, very beautiful verse, he says, the one who is dear to me doesn't cause any disturbance to others, and he is not disturbed by anyone else. Yasman no dvijate loko, lokan no dvijate chayah. He doesn't cause disturbance to others, and others do not cause disturbance to him. So that's the first thing, is to not cause disturbance to anyone. That's like a what is called a min bar, by not unloading any negativity on others, by not causing any disturbance. That itself requires great alertness. So if you are alert through the day, then we will not cause any disturbance to anyone else, including, of course, our own family, starting with that, not showing any pent up emotions on them, or on objects even, abusing objects, um, whatever it might be. So, not causing disturbance to anyone. And again, it begins with the body, not even causing disturbance to one's own body, not eating food that we later regret or doing things we later regret. So, not causing disturbance to anyone, number one. Number two is listen to them. So, be able to just give our full attention to them. We don't have to do anything even if we just give our full attention in any conversation, in any dialogue, in any discussion, bring our full awareness. And that again requires great alertness, because normally when we are talking to someone, the mind goes to what's in it for me, and how can I use this conversation or this for some egoic desire. So these are all parts of actually inquiry, but in a very um, subtle way, maybe, because when we have this attitude of I need to listen to this person, because that is already a service we offer to someone. We don't have to do anything. We just listen to them completely with full attention and no judgment. And whatever they come up with, again, this again requires us to recognize that everyone is a ray of the one supreme being, and therefore whatever they are going through is exactly what they are meant to go through. And so there is no right and wrong, even if it may seem very um, ignorant. It can be seen without any judgment. That's why it is said that there is no, ultimately there is no good and evil, there is only knowledge and ignorance. It is ignorance that causes bad actions at all levels. So if you look at someone not as evil, even the most evil person outwardly, if we look at them as just ignorant, out of compassion, our attitude is very different. But even with normal interactions with friends and colleagues and family, we can listen fully without any judgment, with our complete attention, and then whatever comes out of that action will be the right action. We don't have to prejudge what we need to do. We don't have to, it is not that the word service or seva means we have to physically do something, because many times if we prematurely do things physically, it may boost their ego. We may end up giving people only that which will hurt them in the long run. So just to listen to them unconditionally, accept who they are, what they are, and then out of that listening and attention, if we have to share a few words or do a few things, that comes out of it naturally. So that's the other way. And this attitude of service, one can try it out for oneself. It gives the higher taste of living itself. When we are interacting with people, when we are not looking for self gratification, but when we are there for the other person, recognizing them as divine and being present fully in any conversation, that very presence is awareness. So then sadhana becomes through the day. We are not isolating ourselves to only sitting silently here or wherever we do, but we can be in this silent awareness through the day by being completely present and shifting our paradigm, just to shift, be out of this I and mine, because that is where we are rooted, and that is what causes through the day conflicts. And the other person is also rooted in I and mine, and therefore there is conflict inevitably. But if we are out of the I and mine, then even if the other person is rooted in I and mine, that doesn't touch us. And what's more, they may also sense that they are in a different field altogether, and that may give them also a sense of space and freedom. And whether or not that happens, that's not our expectation. We can be in our own space of freedom by not being rooted in I and mine, but in how can I be, how can I use the faculties, whatever faculties I have, mind and body, to serve the situation. And if when I have that attitude outwardly, what remains inwardly is awareness. So there is a natural awareness out of which alone one can be in this attitude outwardly. So instead of trying to be aware, if we have this attitude of, and that is another word, another meaning of bhakti. Bhakti means love and service. It is not just to, in fact, Bhagavatam has a beautiful verse. It says, the one who goes to a temple and offers devotion but doesn't have the sense of devotion towards living beings, he is not a devotee, is what Kapila says. So, our sense of bhakti or devotion or service has to be toward all beings of the universe. And so, by having this attitude inwardly, while being clear that we are not serving their ego, it's very important, because otherwise, people will use us to serve their ego, and we will also be abused by it. It's a it's not a good place to be. So if we are all this requires great alertness and awareness. If we are aware and alert, then we don't cause any disturbance in others. And if their ego comes up, we remain silent and listen. We don't act on it. We don't feed their ego in any way. And if we see that they are ignorant, we simply remain silent and listen to this. And if we can do something that can steer them toward right wisdom, that's the greatest service we can do, of course, is by pointing to them that they are divine and pointing to them their own true nature, give them a taste of self knowledge. But if not, just simply silently listen and remain in our own self as pure awareness. So, this, if we can go through the day, it's a great sadhana, and we can be in satsang in that way too, even when we are engaged in activities. And thereby, we can, through the day, not lose this current, the current of awareness. In fact, it can be enhanced. We may find a higher taste. We may then look forward to even engaging with people in this attitude of service, because we are giving them the greatest gift. If we are able to give them the gift of self knowledge, there is nothing greater than that. And that helps us. The more we share, the more we are also able to abide in that. And by simply being in silent presence, we are abiding in that. So if one is receptive, we can share it. And if they are not receptive, we simply can remain silent and aware. And that silence itself is the greatest teaching, as Ramana Maharishi would always say. So to remain silent and listen to someone and minimize engagements which are not necessary. These are some of the ways we can go through the day in this current. This can be rightly called the art of living. And this art of living is connected directly to art of dying. That's the interesting thing, because we cannot live unless we die to the self, die to the I. So every moment when we die to the past, we live. Otherwise, we don't live. We are living out of memory and ego and desires, all of which are the past. So we are a zombie going through life unconsciously. So to truly live artfully is to die every moment artfully. If we are, and that is essentially what this attitude of service also brings forth is we die to the I by not being rooted in this question of what's in it for me, which is the default mode of the I. The I perpetuates itself by always looking at every interaction, every situation to add to its bag of memories. So, to die to that every moment is alertness and awareness. And the way to die is by serving.